Aileen Wuornos is a name that still sends chills through the true crime world. Known as one of the first modern female serial killers, her story is as tragic as it is terrifying. From a life of hardship and abuse to a string of brutal murders, Aileen's actions shocked the nation. Between 1989 and 1990, she killed 7 men, claiming they had tried to assault her. Her life and crimes became the center of intense media attention, painting her as a deeply disturbed individual. But was she a cold-blooded killer, or a woman pushed too far by her circumstances? The truth lies somewhere in the chilling details of her story. Aileen Wuornos' early life was filled with hardship. Born in 1956 in Michigan, she faced an unstable and abusive upbringing. Her father was convicted of sexual assault and committed suicide while in prison, and her mother abandoned her when she was just a baby. Aileen and her brother were raised by their grandparents, but even this situation was far from ideal. Her grandfather was reportedly violent and abusive, while her grandmother struggled with alcoholism. By her early teens, Aileen was already engaged in survival sex, trading sexual favors for food, money, and shelter. She became homeless after being thrown out of her grandparents' house, leading her to a life on the streets. The trauma and abandonment she experienced during these formative years shaped the troubled path she would eventually take. As Aileen Wuornos entered her teenage years, she turned to prostitution as a means of survival. Living on the streets with no stable family or support system, selling her body became the only way she could make ends meet. This lifestyle exposed her to danger and exploitation, deepening her mistrust and resentment toward men. Aileen's experiences with violence and abuse from clients would later become a central part of her narrative, as she claimed self-defense in the killings. She portrayed herself as a victim of repeated sexual assault, which she said pushed her to retaliate in deadly ways. Prostitution became more than just a way to survive. It became part of the trauma that fueled her rage. During the late 1980s, Aileen Wuornos met Tyria Moore, a woman who would become her girlfriend and close companion during the time of her crimes. Their relationship was intense and deeply emotional, with Aileen often describing Tyria as the love of her life. The two women lived together, relying on each other for support as they navigated difficult circumstances. Many believe that Tyria had a profound influence on Aileen's life and actions. Some speculate that Aileen's desire to provide for Tyria and keep their relationship intact may have been one of the driving forces behind her descent into violence. Whether Tyria knew the full extent of Aileen's crimes or not, their bond was unbreakable until the murders caught up with them. In late 1989, Aileen Wuornos embarked on what would become a brutal killing spree. Her first known victim was Richard Mallory, a 51-year-old electronics store owner who picked her up while she was working as a prostitute. Mallory had a history of legal trouble and was no stranger to the criminal world, but he could not have anticipated what was to come. Aileen shot Mallory multiple times, claiming it was in self-defense after he attempted to assault her. His murder marked the beginning of a string of violent killings that would unfold over the next year, with Aileen targeting men who crossed her path. This first murder set the tone for the chaos and fear that would soon follow. Aileen Wuornos had a chilling and consistent method of operation. She would lure men by posing as a hitchhiker or offering sex for money, using her role as a prostitute to find her victims. Once they were alone and vulnerable, she would shoot them at close range, often multiple times, leaving no chance for survival. After killing her victims, Aileen would rob them, taking their belongings, cash, or cars to support herself and Tyria Moore. This pattern repeated itself across her 7 known victims, as Aileen used a combination of manipulation, violence, and theft to carry out her deadly crimes. Aileen Wuornos claimed that all of her killings were acts of self-defense. According to her, each of her victims had either physically assaulted or attempted to sexually assault her, and she acted out of fear for her life. This was especially emphasized in the case of her first known victim, Richard Mallory, whom she said had violently attempted. Wuornos argued that she was forced to kill to protect herself from harm. Her self-defense narrative became central to her legal defense, painting her not as a cold-blooded murderer, but as a woman fighting for survival in dangerous situations. This claim, however, was met with skepticism from both investigators and the court. Aileen Wuornos is known to have killed 7 men between 1989 and 1990. Each of her victims had their own background and story, often intersecting with Aileen's life in tragic ways. 1. Richard Mallory, a businessman who picked Aileen up while she was working as a prostitute. He was her first known victim, murdered in November 1989. Wuornos claimed he had assaulted her. 2. David Spears, a truck driver who encountered Aileen in 1990. He was found shot and his body was discovered in a remote area. Aileen later confessed to killing him. 3. Charles Rich, another truck driver. Charles was picked up by Aileen shortly after David Spears. His body was discovered in the woods, also showing signs of gunshot wounds. 4. Troy Burris, a 50-year-old man who met Aileen in a bar. He was found dead with multiple gunshot wounds and his death was linked to her crimes. 5. Peter Seams, a young man who disappeared after meeting Aileen. His body was never found, but Aileen confessed to killing him and disposing of his remains. 6. Robert Pete Seams, similar to Peter, Robert was also a victim of Aileen's violent actions. He was reported missing after encountering her. 7. Walter J. Gieske, a man whose encounter with Aileen ended in violence. He was shot and left dead in the aftermath of Aileen's crime spree. Each of these men met Aileen under different circumstances, but they all became victims of her desperate and violent actions. The common thread was Aileen's role as a prostitute and her claim of self-defense against perceived threats. The media quickly became obsessed with Aileen Wuornos' case, turning her into a sensational figure in the headlines. As one of the few known female serial killers, her story captivated the public and sparked intense interest. Reporters flocked to cover every aspect of her life and crimes. Aileen's troubled background, her relationships, and her brutal killings were all laid bare for the world to see. The media painted her as both a monster and a victim, creating a complex narrative that drew viewers in. Interviews, articles, and news segments filled the airwaves, often focusing on the gruesome details of her murders. This coverage led to widespread discussions about female violence, mental health, and societal issues surrounding women in desperate situations. The sensationalism around Aileen not only fueled public fascination but also shaped the way people viewed her case in the court of public opinion. Her image transformed from that of a troubled woman to a notorious killer, making her one of the most recognizable figures in true crime history. The media frenzy surrounding her story left a lasting impact, ensuring that Aileen Wuornos would be remembered for her chilling actions and the controversies they sparked. As the murders continued, law enforcement began to notice a pattern. They connected the dots between the victims and recognized the similarities in how each crime was committed. The investigation intensified, and a manhunt was launched to track down Aileen Wuornos. Police worked tirelessly, piecing together evidence and eyewitness accounts. They followed her movements across Florida, trying to pinpoint her location and apprehend her. The search became a race against time, with law enforcement determined to stop any further violence. During this critical period, Tyria Moore played a pivotal role in Aileen's capture. As the police closed in on the couple, they approached Tyria, who was also under investigation. Faced with the possibility of serious charges, she made a deal to cooperate with law enforcement. Tyria agreed to provide information about Aileen and their activities in exchange for immunity. This betrayal proved crucial in helping authorities locate Wuornos. With Tyria's insights, the police were able to track Aileen more effectively, leading to her eventual arrest. The manhunt, which had gripped the nation, was nearing its end, thanks to Tyria's decision to turn against her partner. In 1991, Aileen Wuornos was finally arrested at a bar in Volusia County, Florida. After weeks of evading capture, her reign of terror came to an end. Law enforcement officers, acting on tips and information from Tyria Moore, located her at the bar and took her into custody without incident. The atmosphere was tense, as many in the area felt relief that the woman responsible for the murders was finally apprehended. Once in custody, Aileen gave an initial confession to the police. In this chilling moment, she admitted to killing the 7 men but insisted that it was done in self-defense. She claimed that each of her victims had assaulted her or tried to harm her, framing her actions as a fight for survival. What shocked many was her calm demeanor during the confession. Aileen spoke matter-of-factly about the murders, showing little emotion as she detailed the events. This unsettling behavior left both investigators and the public grappling with the complexity of her character. Was she a cold-blooded killer or a victim of her circumstances? In 1992, Aileen Wuornos' trial began, capturing national attention. The courtroom was filled with tension as the prosecution laid out their case against her. Despite Aileen's claims of self-defense, the prosecution painted her as a cold-blooded killer. They argued that her motives were rooted in robbery and anger, pointing out the similarities in how she lured her victims and the violent nature of the killings. Witnesses were called to testify, and the prosecution presented evidence to support their case. They depicted Aileen not as a victim but as a predator, someone who preyed on vulnerable men. The media coverage intensified, with many focusing on the shocking nature of her crimes. As the trial progressed, Aileen's demeanor changed. She seemed detached, almost defiant, during the proceedings. The moment the verdict was announced, it sent shockwaves through the courtroom. Aileen Wuornos was convicted of multiple murders and sentenced to death. Her reaction was stoic, showing little emotion as the judge read the sentence. This moment became an infamous image tied to her case, representing the tragic end of a life marked by violence and pain. It was a stark reminder of the darkness that had unfolded over the previous years. Psychological evaluations conducted on Aileen Wuornos revealed a complicated mental state. Experts diagnosed her with borderline personality disorder and antisocial personality disorder. These findings sparked discussions about her motives and mental health. Some argued that her troubled past and psychological issues influenced her violent actions, leading to a mix of sympathy and revulsion among the public. As Aileen's story unfolded, it quickly became a media sensation. Documentaries, films, and books were produced, each presenting different angles on her life and crimes. Some portray her as a monstrous killer, while others highlight her as a tragic victim of circumstance and abuse. This duality made her a complex figure, evoking both horror and empathy. Through these portrayals, Aileen Wuornos became a symbol of both cruelty and victimhood. Her life story resonated with many, raising questions about society's role in creating such individuals. The contrasting narratives surrounding her legacy continue to spark debates about morality, justice, and the human condition. In her final days, Aileen Wuornos gave one last interview before her execution. During this interview, she continued to insist that her actions were acts of self-defense. She maintained that her victims had attacked her, which she believed justified her actions. However, as the interview progressed, signs of paranoia began to show. Aileen expressed fears about people plotting against her and voiced concerns that she was being manipulated. Her behavior during this interview raised eyebrows and sparked more controversy surrounding her case. Many viewers were left questioning her mental state and the validity of her claims. Aileen's final words and demeanor painted a picture of a woman trapped in her own turmoil, desperately trying to make sense of her violent past. This last interview became a focal point in discussions about her life, her crimes, and the psychological struggles she faced. It highlighted the complexity of her character and the haunting reality of her story, leaving a lasting impression on those who followed her case. On October 9, 2002, Aileen Wuornos was executed by lethal injection in Florida. This marked a significant moment, as she became one of the few women in the United States to be executed for multiple murders. Her execution was met with mixed reactions, reflecting the divided opinions about her life and crimes. As we consider the legacy of Aileen Wuornos, it's clear she remains a complex figure. Some view her as a victim, shaped by a harsh life filled with abuse and trauma. They argue that these experiences pushed her to violence as a means of survival. Others see her as a calculating killer, motivated by robbery and rage. Her case continues to spark debate and discussion, captivating the interest of true crime enthusiasts around the world. Aileen Wuornos' story raises important questions about mental health, societal failure, and the nature of evil, making her one of the most compelling and controversial figures in the history of crime. And with that said, thanks for watching True Stories. If this tale of mystery and superstition caught your interest, hit that subscribe button to join us for more fascinating stories from history's strangest corners. Until next time, stay curious.